This book tells the story of the first of the three battles in 1066 and explains how the two coordinated invasions, one from Norway, the other from Normandy, were organised. But Fulford had a direct impact on many of the subsequent events, and this video covers the events that flowed from the Battle of Fulford. Other videos cover the prelude and the battle itself. The first consequence of the defeat at Fulford unfolds just 5 days later at Stamford Bridge. The second battle is actually more of an ambush because much of the Norse army remained at their base at Riccall. Even those who went with King Harald left their heavy armour and went equipped for hunting according to the Norse sagas, but they might have been making an excuse for their defeat. They were going to receive 200 hostages promised by the defeated Northerners. The invaders were probably confident that there would be no army coming to help, as Tostig had explained that the plan for the Normans to invade simultaneously in the south. They believed that any possible reinforcements were otherwise engaged. But actually King Harald had left for the north with his mounted troops even before the Battle of Fulford took place. He had stopped guarding the south coast opposite Normandy a few weeks before when William quietly relocated his invasion fleet much further up the coast. So as soon as the news of the northern invasion reached Waltham Abbey, which is where Harald was based, he moved swiftly north with his cavalry, which would play a decisive role in the start of the subsequent battle. Tostig had identified a large number of those who were to give him hostages. A central meeting place was suggested, with good roads for this exchange. Stamford Bridge is at the meeting point of 5 of the local wapentaks, and likely had very good connections, so a good place for the exchange. On the appointed day, this large group of hostages was expected, so the approaching army of Harald was not immediately recognised. Tostig's masterful plan meant that any reinforcements should not be able to arrive in time. However, Harald was just as smart as his brother and left his 2 younger brothers and their smaller armies to guard the coast in his absence. But Tostig's clever plan had another consequence for Stamford Bridge. It meant that most of the Mercian army had not taken part in the Battle of Fulford. They had been tricked into occupying the west bank of the River Ouse. So they were ready for action when King Harald arrived at Tadcaster on Sunday, and he told the Mercians to head for Stamford Bridge. Plus he told them to use their boats the next morning to attack the invaders' base at Riccall. Once in York, he sealed the city so nobody could report his arrival, and on Monday morning he arrived at Stamford Bridge. The cavalry was used to harass the lightly armed invaders until the Mercian army had time to arrive. But during this time, King Harald of Norway was killed by an arrow in the throat during this opening skirmish. After a pause for negotiation, Tostig refused to surrender and in the subsequent battle was also killed. The Norse reinforcements summoned from Riccall fared no better, and their invasion force was the northern invasion had been almost destroyed. The Northumbrian army, the Mercian army and the English cavalry would not be in a position to go south with Harald when news of William's arrival reached the north some 12 days after Stamford Bridge. One can speculate that King Harald actually believed that the threat from Normandy had passed, at least for that year, since he did not immediately head south after the victory at Stamford Bridge. William had tricked him. King Harald stayed in the north to organise the burial of his brother, meeting his nephews who had survived the battle, and appoint new earls to replace the missing Morcar. But as soon as he heard of the Norman landing, he rode south. At Waltham Abbey, he held a family conference, and everyone advised him to rest and wait for the northern armies to reorganise and leave his two brothers, who were the Earls of East Anglia and Kent, to confront the Normans. Whether it was a sense of duty or overconfidence, Harold angrily rejected their advice, even, we are told, kicking his mother as she tried to detain him. William's gradual move from Normandy to St Valery was a masterstroke. It was spread over many days, perhaps to make it look less noticeable, perhaps even to look like a dispersal rather than an invasion. Harold now released his army, not least because they were no longer in the right place. William was now in a position to land in southern England on the 15th or 16th of September, the date, coincidentally perhaps, when the Norse invasion did actually land in Northumbria. But the storms that had destroyed some of the Norman ships, as well as much of the English fleet returning to their base at Sandwich, and this bad weather continued and kept William's invasion in harbour. Norse sources report that same strong northerly wind, which we are told conveyed them swiftly to England. We now must rely on some credible reports of how the invasion was bottled up in the mouth of the River Seine, despite some attempts to leave. And another note, William's landing spot at Pevensey was also well chosen, as it was owned by a French religious house, so there'd be no hostile troops on the opposite shore waiting to oppose any landing. So why didn't Tostig's plan work? In a single word, weather, despite the quality of the plan and the very good leadership by all participants. News of the victory at Fulford had enough time to reach to William before he crossed to England. I suspect that boastful Tostig would probably be keen to communicate his success. But the way William stayed on the south coast of England for 2 weeks after landing suggests that he was sticking to the plan that would draw the English army south. English activity around Hastings might have puzzled William, since he should have expected a strong response to his landing. Any reports of Tostig's disaster and death at Stamford Bridge did have time to travel south, but the timetable is tight and does not really allow enough time for William to exploit Harold's absence in the north. The Norman invasion really only had the resources for one big battle, therefore leaving the secure base at Hastings also was seemingly not worth the risk. This judgment was vindicated on the 14th of October 1066 on the slopes of Senlac Hill. The fascinating stories of the survivors, and especially the many influential women, are told in the book. The ingenuity and courage of the widows of England, led by Githa, the matriarch of the Godwinsons, is told. The abortive attempt by the sons of Harold to restore their lost fortunes failed twice, and they probably returned to Githa's family in Denmark. Actually, you can see the boat in which they carried out their raids, as it can be visited in the Ship Museum in Roskilde. One English survivor, Earl Waltheof of Huntingdon, who had fought at Huntingdon and at Fulford and Stamford Bridge, was probably responsible for ensuring the story of the lone Viking defending a bridge during the closing phase of the battle that was recorded in the chronicles. Those who had fought at Hastings, however, lost everything. When the Doomsday Survey was completed, the reckoning was taken from the time of King Edward, or TRE as it is recorded. King Harold was ignored as an illegitimate king. This was year zero for England. The omission of this encounter at Fulford from our English narrative has allowed a lot of mythologizing about 1066. Contemporary records plus the abundant finds evidence from Fulford explains the key action, and with 5 fresh armies it can be argued that this was the biggest battle of 1066, not Stamford Bridge or Hastings. And including the opening battle at Fulford provides a much better interpretation, a much more sensible interpretation of the subsequent events that led to the destruction of the Anglo-Saxon rule. The process of exploring history to tell the story is explored alongside the events of 1066. The source information reported on each page in this book explores how credible the stories we are told. On the final page of this illustrated history, 2 contrasting headlines from modern newspapers confront how important it is to be well informed and entrust the sources.